Good morning. You are listening to National Real Estate Auction Radio. I am your host, Doug Dennison, and we are broadcasting from beautiful St. Augustine, Florida. We've got our first call. Good morning. You're on the air.
Yeah, this is Congressman Billy Long.
Well, Congressman Long, thank you so much for calling in, and we just got on the air. I hardly had a chance to introduce the show, but again, this is the National Real Estate Auction Radio Show. I'm your host, Doug Dennison. We're broadcasting from beautiful St. Augustine, Florida, the nation's oldest city, at WFOY 1240 AM. Congressman Long, thank you so much for calling in. I met you a couple of weeks ago up in Washington, D.C., because you were a co-sponsor of a bill that I was interested in. But enough about me. Tell us about you, sir.
Well, I real estate auctioneer for 30-some years, and attended the Missouri Auction School back in the late 70s, and had a very good career in the auction business, real estate and otherwise, and just was kind of fed up with what was going on in Washington, D.C., and thought that we needed to get back to what the Founding Fathers envisioned, and that's citizen legislators, not legislators, not people that just move up through the chairs and end up in Washington. So that's why I kind of took my campaign. I was the outsider, kind of ran every man campaign, and only need to get people up there that are signing the front of a paycheck, I think, instead of the back of a check.
Well, I appreciate again your efforts, and you and I have a similar interest. You were on the radio for years, is that correct?
I did talk radio for 6 years, and 3 hours every morning, Monday through Friday. So yes, sir, and I think that really benefited me in my run for Congress, because my name ID was already out there from auctions and real estate over 30-some years, but the radio really was kind of the icing on the cake, because it was a big boom in AM signal and covered 94 counties and part of 3 states, so really reached out. In the 7th District of Missouri that I represent is only 10 counties. It's right here in the southwest corner of Missouri. Springfield, Branson, Joplin are probably the names people would know. And, of course, Joplin's where we had the horrendous tornado back May 22nd that took 160 lives, 8,000 homes, 54% of the school capacity was wiped out, and I think 500 businesses. And Extreme Home Makeover was in Joplin this past week and built 7 homes in 7 days, and I haven't been able to make it down there. I just got in from D.C. late last night, so I haven't been down there to check and see how that came along, but I'm sure they did a good job.
Well, what was your real decision on deciding to run? I know that you talked about you didn't want to sit on the sidelines anymore, but what is your quest while you're there as a congressman?
Well, like a lot of people on the Republican, on the conservative side say, and the people that come with a business perspective, is we have to reduce the scope and the size of government. We cannot be all things to all people. Regulation is choking this country. We have 15 jobs bills right now in the Senate, and the Senate will not take them up. So we want to make this the best place in the world to do business, not handicap people and make it the worst place in the world to do business. We have the highest corporate tax rate that there is right now. I'd like to see people, I'd like to give an amnesty for money for this trillion or so dollars that's overseas. These corporations have made overseas because we forced them out of this country. I'd like for them to be able to get their money back in this country and not tax them. And if we would put in an amnesty for their dollars coming back in, then we'd have another trillion or so in this economy here.
Well, I think many people across the country would agree with you completely. I was up there and I was with Tommy Rowell, who of course you know for many years from
you bet.
Rowell Auctions, and there was an interest that we had because we had read something in the newspaper several months ago that there was a bill that was going to propose auction of federal properties to pay down deficits. And Jeff Denham Congressman Jeff Denham from California has proposed House Representative Bill 1734, and you are a co-sponsor. Tell us a little bit about that bill and why you decided to co-sponsor it.
Well, Jeff has worked extremely hard on the government owns so much property, and I'm not just talking about land. I'm talking about buildings that are underutilized, not used, that are sitting in mothballs, and it just goes on and on for years and years and years. So Congressman Denham has done an excellent job at coming and identifying those properties, and it's time to get them off our books. Any businessman in their right mind, if you had a building sitting around with no income, it was a cost to you for upkeep and maintenance, no one's used it in 10 or 12 years, we need to get that property off the books. So that's why I was glad to co-sponsor that piece of legislation with Representative Denham.
Well, very good, and Mr. Congressman Denham has been really supportive of this. I think this is his calling in trying to make government more efficient, just like you are. And we'd like to try to make sure that the private sector in auctions are part of this because, number one, as you know, auctions are fair and transparent, and I don't think that we need to build the government anymore, so trying to get it out to the private sector would be a good thing, I think.
I think it'd be an excellent thing because you face two horns of a dilemma, I guess, and that is, one, do you make the government bigger and put in your own auction division and have a government entity that's called the auctioneers for the United States government and have trained professional auctioneers sell that property for you that's on the government payroll, or do you take general service employees, general service administration employees, and say, look, this deal of auctioneering real estate, it's really not that big a deal. It's just people out there talking fast. We'll just have you go out on an off Saturday and sell off some of this property. Neither one of those are palatable to me. What we need to do is let professional auctioneers auction that property. It's not a burden on the government. You don't have an expense. You're not creating another agency, and you're not sending people out there that don't have a clue what they're doing and telling them to become an auctioneer overnight. It's just not quite that easy, as you know, and as auctioneers across the country know. So I'm very much for having professional auctioneers such as Tommy Rao and other buddies of mine that have been in the auction business forever be able to sell those properties off for Congressman Denham. I serve on Transportation and Infrastructure Committee with Jeff Denham, and so I'm pretty active with him in that regard. And like I said, he's really done a splendid job. And if we don't have time today to get into details, but if you could hear some of the stories of some of the buildings and properties and buildings we're not using 15% of their square footage, and there are other people, and they're a big burden for upkeep, and there's other people that will come in and take those properties and start paying the upkeep and everything and buy them off the government.
Well, yeah, and then you have these new, actually, taxpayers that will make the property, more beautiful, more productive, and then they're going to pay taxes, which is a trickle down to municipalities, which of course is important.
Right, exactly, and there's not much common sense in Washington, and that's what we're trying to do is return a little common sense. Jeff is one of the freshmen with myself. We now have 89 freshmen after we won the special election in New York for Anthony Weiner's old seat, and the special election in Nevada for Dean Heller's seat when Dean moved up to the Senate side. So there's a lot of people in that freshman class that come from a background such as mine. That there's two auctioneers. Jeff Duncan from South Carolina.
Yes,
there's another freshman in Congress with me that's an auctioneer. There's I think 3 car dealers. There's 3 doctors. There's a roofing contractor. There's a pizza parlor owner. There's a termite exterminator. So it truly is what the Founding Fathers envisioned. That is citizen legislators. Like I say, not legislators.
Well, I agree completely. Once you get to Washington, it must be quite a transition. And and from what I saw when I was up there, I mean, staff does a great deal of work. They work very, very hard. Tell me some of the people in your staff that do such a great job for you.
Well, our chief of staff has been on the Hill 11 years, and he worked for Senator Gordon Smith on the Senate side, and he's worked for Mac Collins in Georgia, and then when Mac ran for the governor or Senate down there, I'm not sure, Lynn Westmoreland was sworn in. He worked for Lynn for 6 years and just does an excellent job. And then my legislative director has been on the Hill, I think, 7 or 8 years. He worked in the Bush administration for Department of Energy. My deputy chief of staff is a recent law school graduate that came work with me on the campaign, and just but the staff is so important because people say, are you reading the bills? Nobody reads the bills. Are you reading the bills? You need more than one person to read these bills. As an example, this week we had a bill put up, and it was about copper, mining for copper. And on the outside, it looked like a great deal, but as you peel back the layers of the onion and look closer, the way that it was written by the environmentalists not to let you mine copper because there were certain criteria that you had to hit in there that were impossible. So for the untrained eye that's perusing says, "Oh, this is great for copper exploration. Here we're gonna support this bill." So that's why staff is so important. And we have legislative staff meetings, at least 3 times a week, if not more. And one thing that a congressman does that people, I don't think, realize is we're up over 21,500 pieces of mail that we have answered since January the 5th when I was sworn in. 21,500. Our oldest letter in our office right now is 8 days old.
Wow.
So that means if you have written my office, our goal is 2 weeks. 8 days is on the short side. That's the best we've probably gotten it up to. But if you write our office, now I've got to preface that by saying if you put a stamp on a letter and mail it to us, don't expect a 2-week return. Don't expect an 8-day return because it takes more than 2 weeks for them to sort that mail and whatever they do to check it for anthrax or irridated or whatever the term is that
Sure.
they use. So now if you email, you definitely should get a response within 2 weeks. Once your mailed letter, your snail mail letter hits our office, you should also get a response within 2 weeks. Sometimes people will mail us a letter and they'll say, well, the congressman didn't get back. We haven't even seen their letter yet. And a lot of times they're writing in about legislation. This legislation moves quickly. So if they write in, and that's something they're very concerned about, of course, then we're concerned about it as their congressman. And I always tell people the same thing. I say, we don't promise good results. We just promise good effort. And very proud of my staff in Washington and in Springfield and in Joplin. We have district offices in those 2 areas. And something that, another thing that people probably don't realize about Congress is the constituent services that we offer. We get a lot of veterans issues that we handle, a lot of Social Security issues that we handle. If people are having trouble with an agency of the government, you can go to your congressman in your area and say, hey, I don't think I'm getting the correct benefits I'm supposed to get through the VA, and I've been fighting this deal for 6 or 7 years. And sometimes just making one phone call to the right person will get somebody's ear in Washington, and we can be beneficial to help people.
Well, I know you guys do a great job, and especially as a freshman, doing wonderful. Looking at this bill, and again, this is Congressman Jeff Denham's bill that you're a co-sponsor of. It seems like there's participation from both sides of the aisle, that Democrats and Republicans are on board with this. Is that correct?
Not so much.
Okay.
We had that in a committee meeting the other day, and we're getting quite a bit of pushback on it from the Democratic side of the aisle, unfortunately. And it's one of those things, you show them a building that's been laying around 12 years and mothballed.
Yep.
And you say, here's a plan. We've been out. We've held a hearing. We went out to this building when it was 15 degrees and showed everybody there was no utilities on and that we need to do something with it. And then, the other side of the aisle will say, well, are you sure this is the best way to dispose of this property? Well, any way to dispose of the property is going to be the best way when you've got a building that's been sitting for 12 years with no income and no usage out of it, and just a burden on the taxpayers for upkeep and maintenance. So, unfortunately, we are getting some pushback on it, but you're going to have pushback on anything. I think we will be able to get it through. I don't think it's going to be that severe, but I would certainly not call it a bipartisan effort. We did do something in a bipartisan fashion this week. We repealed the goofy 3% withholding for companies that do business with the government. So these government contractors and things, back in 2006, they passed a piece of legislation that was to kick in January 1st of next year of 2012, and these companies are supposed to, hold back, or the government's going to hold back 3% of what they pay them for their contracts to make sure these people pay their tax. Well, I think we had 405 people vote out of a Congress of 435 people, and of course some people weren't there, but we had 405 yes votes for this, and it was co-sponsored by Wally Herger, a conservative out of California, and Earl Blumenauer, a liberal out of Oregon, and those two guys hooked up, a conservative liberal, both from the West Coast, and put this legislation up. And sometimes some things are so egregious that you get a lot of bipartisan support, and this is one of those cases where we were glad to help people that do deal with the government and repeal that goofy 3% withholding.
Good. I love to see, both sides getting together for the good of the American taxpayer payer and the American people. That's why everybody's there. I know that.
Right.
You were talking about cost of the property for the taxpayers, that even though it was mothballed in your terms for many years, it still costs money to keep these buildings up. And I don't think that most of the American taxpayers realize that, and that these properties are costing them money. And so if we can sell them, that's number one, a great thing to help balance the budget. And estimates I've heard is as big as $15 billion through all the properties. But more as important, I think, is to take them off of the tax, take them off of the cost of the American taxpayer, because that's just nuts.
Right, and a lot of these are prime locations.
Yes.
These are buildings that were used years ago, and for one reason or another, they've, in a lot of cases, they went out and built a new building somewhere and kept the old building. But as fate would have it, now some of these have turned up in prime locations. So we feel confident, Representative Dennison and myself, that we can interest some high-profile players to come in, some hotel chains,
sure,
or whatever, event centers, that could take these buildings, razz them, and build state-of-the-art facilities, and then they'd be on the tax rolls for those local communities.
Yes.
And get them off the government's back, off our, the burden of trying to maintain and upkeep these properties. Plus, they're not in the tax basis now, so those school districts in those areas where you've got all these buildings, government buildings sitting around, they're not paying any real estate tax. So.
Well, Congressman Long, great job up there. Is there a website that people can go to just say, hey, Congressman Long, you're doing great, and send you an email of support?
You bet, sure. We've got Billy Long for Congress.com, and you spell out 4FOR, Billy Long, and it's Billy. Sometimes people try and spell it with an IE, but Billy Long, Long, for Congress.com, and we've got a Facebook page they can click on there and send us a note and keep up on what we're doing in Washington.
Well, Congressman Long, thank you so much for calling in, your support of an effort that is trying to sell unused surplus properties to the government, help balance the budget, but also take the cost off of the American taxpayer for upkeep of these properties for years and years. So thank you very much, sir, and again, appreciate you calling in on a Friday.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
Take care now. Well, that was great. Congressman Billy Long from Missouri talking about the bill to get rid of properties that the government owns. And I'm going to read a quick article that was in the newspaper up there. The newspaper is called The Hill, and it says, "Plan to shed excess federal properties marches onward." It was written by Vicki Needham on the 20th of October. And it says, "A plan by the federal government to shed excess properties and potentially save billions of dollars to help reduce the deficit marches on behind the scenes as Congress considers legislative proposals." Also says that Congressman Dennison has taken the lead in the House in a measure that would set up a system similar to that of the Pentagon's Base Closure and Realignment Commission, BRAC, to sell, demolish, and consolidate property, with the potential of garnering up to $15 billion on more than 14,000 properties that have been identified. And this is something that the president is also on board with in regards to trying to sell these properties. In fact, on February 14th in his budget address in Maryland, to quote just one sentence, it says, "To take just one example, by getting rid of 14,000 office buildings, lots, and government-owned properties we no longer need, we can save taxpayers billions of dollars." So it seems like everybody's on board. Now we just got to push it forward and negotiate so that everybody can have a hand in it so that we can do this for the American taxpayer. Very, very important. Sell these properties, raise money to help balance the budget, and take the very costly expenses of holding a property off of the American taxpayer. Very good stuff. We're going to go for a break, and we will be right back. Thank you for listening to the program.